Why can I not use words today? Come out of my brain. What's up, witches? It's March 1st, and so I wanted to do another pagan book review video for everybody because, as always, I have been spending whatever free time I have nowadays, which sadly isn't much, but what I do have, I usually spend reading, as always, and so I have 3 more books to discuss with you and review today. For this video, I will also try something new, and if I make lengthier videos going forward, we'll try to remember to keep doing, and that is to put timestamps down below. So if you want to jump to one book or another, or come back to one later, you will be able to do that. And yes, I will try to filter through my ramblings as best I can. And hopefully I have some type of cards or timestamps in them in the future. Let's get into it. So the first book is not specifically Norse paganism related, but it is paganism related. And this book was gifted to me by my aunt, actually. I learned after kind of coming out of the broom closet myself, so to speak. I'm not like super open and out there with my family about my new beliefs or practices, but they know that I'm exploring some type of paganism or witchcraft-centered religion. And then it turned out that my aunt is actually a Wiccan. She sent me this book, which is titled Wicca, A Guide for the Solitary Practitioner by Scott Cunningham. And as you can see, I've notated it a little bit as I've gone through it, because while I have settled on Norse paganism and those gods and goddesses specifically, and so growing up, Wicca was the first religion outside of the Christianity spectrum that I kind of first heard about or was introduced to, and I started exploring it many years ago, but there's a lot about it that appeals to me in its core concepts and beliefs and practices, and as someone who studies a lot of comparative mythology myself, I can definitely appreciate the foundations from which it was grown, in terms of it being a kind of more modern day amalgamation of many historical beliefs and practices. For me, I needed something a little bit more specific in terms of my deity archetypes that I wanted to work with, because with Wicca, you usually just work with the god, which is usually depicted in his horned god aspect, Cernunnos, or the goddess, some usually portrayed as the mother goddess, or sometimes often in the triple goddess aspect, which is maiden, mother, crone. And so while I see a lot of those embodied in many of the Norse deities, especially where my patroness Freya and her brother Frey are concerned, I guess it was just too all-encompassing, too broad, and too wispy and vague of a concept for me to really connect with and kind of wrap my mind around. Whereas working with the Norse pantheon, I have definitely found to just be a little bit more accessible, and honestly, they were just the first deities I reached out to that I ever actually got a response back from, which is why I have stuck with them. There's a lot in this book that I found very useful, as someone who does want to incorporate witchcraft into my pagan practices, especially where Freya is concerned, her being a goddess of magic and satyr. But yes, for the most part, I'm a shy person, I'm an introvert. Aside from attending, one or two big gatherings throughout the year when I can, I will be a solitary practitioner for the most part, and that's how I've been my entire life. I spend all of my time alone in my room reading and just working on different arts and craft projects and, pursuing my hobbies and my interests, which now includes paganism and witchcraft. The grounding principles and foundations behind both paganism and Wicca, which he touches on a lot in this book, is a reverence for nature and just feeling a connection and a presence and a spirituality being out in nature. And that is something that I think was drawing me into a pagan path really my whole life. I've always had that spiritual connection with nature and animals, but especially over the past year, I was just finding a lot of comfort and solace in nature and being able to go outside when we couldn't really do a whole lot else. And so, up until meeting Freya and deciding to continue working with her on a more one-on-one basis, I have, always been drawn to Wicca and paganism. And so there's a lot that you can take away and incorporate into your practice as whatever flavor of pagan you end up settling with. And like I said, this being Wicca-based, the rituals are usually invoking specifically just the goddess and the god, but I think you could take a lot of these principles and rituals and tailor them and adapt them to whatever deities you are specifically working with. One of which is that, being a solitary practitioner, this is really adapted for someone that may either be unable to work with a group or a coven, or just have no interest in doing so. And you know what? That's fine. One thing that I had marked off that I found very important to keep in mind, especially for those of us who are new to exploring paganism, Wicca, any type of new path or spirituality. One important takeaway from this book, as someone who is a very keep to myself person and is very private in a lot of ways about my personal life and my beliefs, even especially going into something new like witchcraft or a more solitary, like individualistic religion, is that I tend to seek out validation from others a lot and doubt myself and my own intuition, my own knowledge, my own abilities. And so one important thing that I took away from this book is this passage where he says to never feel inferior because you're not working under the guidance of a coven or a teacher. Don't worry that you won't be recognized as a true witch or a true pagan. Such recognition is important only in the eyes of those giving it or withholding it. Otherwise, it is meaningless. You need only worry about pleasing yourself and developing a rapport with the goddess and the god. It even says right in the Havamal that you can never be sure and certain where you stand in another's mind or heart. So you have to build up your reputation and your self-esteem for yourself. No one can give you permission or hand you your own power, is something that I have definitely been taught by Freya and by many others who are walking this path. So this was a very useful book. There are also some parts in here that I think would be, you know, maybe not as useful or applicable like the specific Wicca or goddess rituals that he lays out, but it's just a really good primer for someone who wants to get into witchcraft. And he has a little section in the back here with a lot of just different guides that you can use to incorporate in your own Book of Shadows if that's something that you are interested in doing. I've kind of started one, but I have many witchy journals going on right now for all of my different ideas. But yeah, some parts were kind of more skimmable, but in terms of someone who just wants to get more into the habit of pagan practice, there's a lot that you can take and adapt in here, because the back half of the book, exercises and magical techniques. So it goes into how to start a journal or a Book of Shadows, how to get into doing breath work or meditation, different visualization exercises if that's something that you're new at. He touches briefly on energy play, Kundalini, Reiki, Chi, whatever you want to call it, energy, and, you know, just raising your own energy and your own willpower and directing it out into the universe for certain purposes. That's what magic is. So energy work is definitely an important part of that. There's a chapter on self-dedication if you want to do a self-dedication ritual to a certain god or goddess. There's some good things that you could kind of go through and adapt in here, as well as a base that you can use for ritual design. So that was something I thought might be useful, especially for someone who's new to it like me, and who only had kind of dabbled in researching Wicca before. As someone who wasn't raised religious, I'm not used to sitting down and praying to deity on a regular basis or talking to a deity on a regular basis. So, let alone crafting formal rituals and offerings. So for the most part, my daily practices as a pagan are somewhat informal and sporadic. So this gives 9 basic components of ritual that the book walks you through that you can adapt when you're doing your own private rituals and offerings. I just honestly don't have the attention span or time or energy most days to go through a whole formalized, like, cast a circle and get out all your tools on the altar and do this, that, and invoke the 4 winds and blah, blah, blah. And, you know, not to cast aspersions on any of that by any means. Do I think all of those steps are necessary in private practice all of the time? No. Maybe if I want to do something more formal by myself during the equinoxes or more important days of the pagan or Wiccan year, then this is something that may come in very handy for developing those more formal rituals for someone who's new to that. And then the other good thing in here is at the back, there's recipes for different things you can make for offerings, recipes for incenses, and then a brief herbal and crystal rune and sigil grimoire. So just some basics here for anyone who's interested in nature worship, solitary practice, and incorporating witchcraft and magic and ritual into your pagan practice. This was a very quick, easy, not too heavy or too in-depth, but yeah, it goes over some good basics for Wicca, which definitely I think has some foundational commonalities with a modern day pagan practice. So take from it what you will, as always. The next one I'll just touch on briefly because it's just kind of a cute, fun read and something that I got as a Christmas gift, but I've just been kind of taking time here and there to skim through it in the evenings, and that is this very beautiful coffee table-like book of Nordic folk and fairy tales. And so aside from just the fact that it was a beautiful book, as someone who is into comparative mythology and folklore, I definitely think that for something like paganism in particular, where we really don't have a lot that has been handed down to us in the modern day, because those religions and customs were eradicated, repressed, stamped out, and driven underground by the spread of Christianity and other religions. For those regions, if you go and look back at a lot of their fairy tales and folk tales, while we see some Christian morality tales coming into play here a lot of times, you also see a lot of holdovers from the old beliefs. Like, you will see magic, witches, elves, trolls, fairies, all of the above in here, even in those tales. Like, you'll see tales where someone is supposed to be like a good Christian man, but God and Jesus are telling him to go seek help from the elves, and it's like I said, we have these big long games of telephone, basically, where things are appropriated here and there, bits and pieces taken out, shuffled around, and so it's just very interesting to see those little kernels of truth and those winks and those nods to old beliefs and old gods popping up in these fairy tales. And so these are Nordic tales specifically from Norway, Sweden, Finland, Iceland, and Denmark. But the nice thing is that in the back of the book, it does cite all of these sources that they got the tales from. So if you're anything like me and you like getting lost down rabbit holes and doing further research in this homework religion, it gives you some more things to kind of go off of from there. And the third book I don't have in paper, but it's out there on the interwebs if you can get a hold of it, and especially for someone like me who is drawn to and works primarily now with the Vanir gods, which is Frey, and their father Njord. I have this book that I've been reading called Visions of Vanaheim, and it's one of the few books that I have been able to find out there specifically on the Vanir gods, because since the Aesir won the war between the two groups, most of the stories that were preserved and handed down and compiled in the Eddas are focused on the Aesir pantheon, which is, Odin, Loki, Thor, and those guys. So this is one of the few books I've been able to find. It's a more recent book. It looks like it was published in 2009, and it's just by an author or a group called Svartasol. This book goes into some of the historical background behind the worship of these deities. It breaks it down by chapter for each deity. So we have a chapter on Njord, a chapter on Njörthus, a chapter on Frey, a chapter on Freya, and within those, it first will touch a little bit on summaries of what we do have in the actual lore on these gods, but then from there, the bulk of this book is made up of UPG, which stands for Unverified Personal Gnosis. Gnosis meaning knowledge. So most of this book is just people's personal first-hand accounts of their own experiences with these deities and how they incorporate them into their modern day practice. So it's a lot more of like modern day views and experiences with these gods, because with the Vanir, that's kind of in large part, all we really have to go on. Is just the handful of things that we have from the Eddas, and then the handful of things that we can trace back archaeologically. And then other than that, with the Vanir especially, there's just so much that we don't have preserved historically about how they were worshipped, what they were like, how they were viewed. So with these deities, it does mostly come down to seeking out other people's experiences with them, matching it up and comparing them with your own, but then just taking away from it what you will, as always. Don't, just because someone says that their experience or interactions with a deity has been like a total opposite 180 from yours doesn't mean that either of you is wrong. These gods don't just have one thing that they're associated with. They're varied personalities, just like we are. As someone who wants to get to know the Vanir better and get to know more about them and what working with them is like, I found this book very helpful and useful, and found a lot to take away from it, because a lot of it did resonate with my own experiences of the Vanir so far, especially where Freya and Frey are concerned. I haven't really interacted personally with Njord a lot, but I have done some offerings to him. And, same with Nerthus. I haven't really felt her call or done much specifically to her, but I am a nature lover, nature worshiper, and so I am sure that I will be incorporating her into a lot of that moving forward. And another thing I found interesting about this book is that it doesn't just talk about them, but it also has a lot of chapters on other gods which aren't so commonly grouped in with the Vanir, or rather who we can't say with 100% certainty just based on historical texts are or are not Vanir specifically, but that may be associated with the Vanir at times in stories and lore, or that just people personally have come to associate with those gods and their principles, their customs, the things that they preside over, which with the Vanir is usually wealth, prosperity, water, fertility. They're usually the gods of agriculture, like Frey. And so I list some other deities in here, like Uller, for example. Gulveig is sometimes associated with Freya. Sif is listed here, Thor's wife, I think because she is also a grain goddess. And similarly, we have Iduna and Eir, and then also some other, not necessarily specifically Norse gods, like Nehelenia, Hern, Wayland, so also sometimes called Voland the Smith, and Frodi, which is, I think, in Saxo Grammaticus's Gesta Danorum, which is a history of the Danes. He is sometimes viewed as being the same or similar to Frodi Frey. So yeah, really a lot to look into here, and then after specifically going into all of those gods, the rest of the book is more of people's own personal UPG as far as their own rituals, and just their own, just personal knowledge, things that they have known or come to know or feel to be truth based on their own insights, researches, readings, communications with deities. So if you're looking into learning more about and working more with the Vanir in particular, I highly recommend that you go get a hold of Visions of Vanaheim. I've just been kind of flipping through it here and there. I haven't really read it all straight through cover to cover, because I'm kind of getting familiar with each of these deities one at a time almost. I don't want to put my brain into overload, trying to take on too much at once. So trying to be the tortoise rather than the hare over here, and slow and steady wins the race. So just been taking my time, getting to know these different deities and learning more about them and working more with them as they had in turn have kind of stepped forward and made themselves known to me. Yeah, specifically the Visions of Vanaheim and Scott Cunningham's Wicca, a guide for the Solitary Practitioner in particular, I think will be very useful as someone who is more well-versed in the mythology lore side of things and not as experienced in the actual day-to-day practice of offerings and rituals are concerned. So, but that's all I have for you this month. I think I'm going to try to maybe set up I have like a website I've been playing around with where I'm going to throw up like bonus content and things like that. And one of the things I might do there is set up like a little system where if people like support my channel, or one of like the extra content that I might put up over there is like creating polls where you can give input on what off of my reading list you want me to tackle next and read and review for you. So, because I have a very lengthy list of books that I want to read and get through that are related to paganism or Norse paganism. So I've been trying to do this where I will pick two or three and try to really, buckle down and get through those over the month so that I can come out with one of these videos every month. And then it also helps keep me on track because otherwise I'm the type of person who will have 5 different books that I'm trying to read all at the same time, and so I never end up finishing any of them because I'm always like going back and forth and having to start and stop them. And then it's just harder to kind of absorb the information from them, jumping all around all over the place like that. So this is also just a good way of keeping myself focused and on track and really honing in on just one or two things, one or two concepts to explore at a time. So I hope that this was helpful to you, and I will have more witchy content coming out for you in the near future.